The podcast you're about to listen to is from a book series on post-qualitative, new materialist and critical posthumanist research. You can find it on the following website, www.postqualitativeresearch.com.
Hello, my name is David Cole. I'm going to talk about my chapter on a new science of contemporary educational theory, practice and research. So this chapter really looks at three major French thinkers, Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida and Gilles Deleuze, and tries to trace their influence in terms of educational research, theory and practice. So there's a lot to talk about and a lot for the somebody doing educational research or entering into the field of education to really think about. So I'll just try and sort of simplify it in terms of this recording. I would say the influence of Michel Foucault is probably the most highly recognized in educational research. Michel Foucault was primarily a historian, but he looked to read history in new and unusual ways to open up our relationships with knowledge, with other factors that run through history, such as his study of prisons and madness and sexuality, etc. So one can readily do the same in education. So in education, Foucault has been applied as a type of discourse analysis. So education can be understood as being constituted by different competing discourses which will try and dominate and not really engage with the other as such, and creating by doing that aspects of otherness and alienation within the system of education. So quite a lot of Foucauldian analysis in education involves language and involves how language might be used by teachers, by administrators, by official curriculum documents, and these can be analyzed and understood in terms of the power, in terms of the identity, in terms of the different ways in which the system creates or can create exclusions and alienations through these types of normalizations within the system. So as I say, Foucault has been very well established in terms of educational research. Famous educational researchers such as Stephen Ball come to mind, but many others use Foucault's work as a way of understanding and thinking about how their research, theory and practice in education can be influenced by these discourses, by these ways of thinking that uphold the discourses that are historical and have changed in time, as well as different influences have impacted on the way these discourses might be formed, such as more recently online and digital discourses, which can have a different, more hybrid feel than direct human-to-human discourse. So the second major thinker in France, who rose to prominence during the 1960s and 70s was Jacques Derrida. Jacques Derrida was primarily a philosopher, but he did do work in literature and linguistics, and it was, he's a very sophisticated, highly intellectual thinker who, even though he was, he worked against the mainstream of Western thinking, he rose to, especially by when he was in America and places like Yale, he rose to prominence as a Western thinker, or as a thinker of the West's tradition, and how that kind of works together through things like logos. So his most important, or his biggest theory or philosophical enterprise that people usually quote is called deconstruction. There are many misunderstandings and overgeneralizations about exactly what Derrida was trying to do with deconstruction, because his books are not that clear. At times it's very opaque writing. So what he's trying to do in many of his books is underwrite or deconstruct the way in which things like power or reason are manifest in this Western tradition. So he's trying to undermine them. So he has strategies to look at, for example, how opposites might be working through the theory. And so he's deconstructing that. And again, similar to Foucault, educational researchers, theoreticians and practitioners use that to think about how language, or more broadly text, can have these symbolic markers or traces within it which act as exclusionary zones within this text. Whether it's often Derrida is often quoted as saying that everything is text, so everything can be kind of understood textually. Whether he meant it literally like that is debatable. I don't think he actually did, but certainly his influence and the way deconstruction was used very prominently during the 1990s and 2000s, especially from America in literary, cultural studies, things like that, was to deconstruct Western texts and to look very carefully at the dynamics of the text and how it is symbolically portraying questions of power, of agency, of reason, of identity, so philosophical things which might be dominating other less prominent ideas which might come from the East or Africa or other groups. So to finish off, the third theorist that I talk about in this chapter is Gilles Deleuze. So the title of the chapter, New Science, really refers to Deleuze's take on French philosophy, which intersects with Foucault and Derrida. All three thinkers are separate, though I think Deleuze takes these ideas further because he tried to think beyond the human and beyond language. So Foucault, you can kind of understand as really a historian that helps with the history of ideas. Derrida is a philosopher that helps with understanding language and language moves. Deleuze is a thinker that helps you to think outside of normatively defined, human-only or language-based ways of doing things. So Deleuze introduces mathematics, he introduces science into his philosophy, into his analysis of thinkers and concepts such as difference and repetition, or the nature of sense, the logic of sense, to undermine what or how you can rethink, not just in terms of producing more language, but in terms of truly rethinking ontologically and deeply about these concepts. So whereas Foucault and Derrida can be reduced to a type of language game, Deleuze always steps outside of that and tries to initiate new ways of thinking by constructing concepts such as the plane of immanence, or desiring machines, or the rhizome, which function in different ways in his book, and as he says in the Monde article, as a kind of a conceptual toolbox that educationalists or others can use to open up new thought in their particular field or in their particular study. And I think as a primary thinker, Deleuze has given rise to many of the ideas that the new materialisms and posthumanism and postqualitative researchers in education are trying to grapple with at the moment. So it's worth going back to Deleuze and rereading his texts to try and understand the philosophy and the intent behind them. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you would like to know more about this chapter, please visit the website www.postqualitativeresearch.com, and please stay tuned for future podcasts.